In the previous lesson, we talked about adding data annotations to the model's properties, which would be utilized by the view for doing things like formatting the various properties that are displayed, and then also for validation purposes. But do you see a fundamental problem with adding attributes to this file? I mean, think about the file itself. It was generated automatically by Visual Studio using T4 templates whenever we generated the entity data model. So what happens if we need to go back into the entity data model and modify something about it? In this case, I'm just going to go and right-click anywhere inside of the Acme Products entities.edmx file, and I'm going to select Update Model from the database. And it's going to ask, do you want to add or delete items? And we're just going to make sure that it refreshes the products table. I don't even know if we need to select that, honestly. But I'm going to go ahead and click Finish. And after a moment, we get a notification. It says that the product.cs class was modified outside of the source editor. Do you want to reload it? So here's what happened. We had the products.cs class open. We refreshed the entity data model. It reran the T4 templates. It regenerated that file. And so what this message is telling us is that it has been updated, but when we turn back to that product.cs tab, it's not going to have the most current version of that file from the file system. Do you want to reload that file? And we'll say, yeah, let's go ahead and load its current state from the file system. And now when we turn over there, notice that, where did our data entities go? Well, they've been blown away by the T4 templates. Now, fortunately, the fix is pretty simple to do this. But this will, as you'll see, snowball into some other conversations. But let's start at a high level. Notice that the entity data model class is marked with the keyword partial. And that's really the key to this. Partial means that we can extend this class with another class file that has the exact same name, product, and that is also marked with the partial class. So what we're going to do is create a companion file, a companion product.cs that will only be used to add the data annotations. So then if we add or remove properties or update the entity data model in some way, we're not going to lose all of our work. It'll be in another class file that T4 templates won't touch. So I'm going to select the models folder, and I'm just going to go to project and select add class, and we'll give this file a different name. We'll call it product metadata.cs, but inside of it we're just going to have another public partial class product. All right, and furthermore, we need to make sure that this new product class is in the same namespace as our original product.cs. So you can see that they're both in the acme.models namespace. So in other words, if you put two partial classes with the same name but in different namespaces, you've essentially created two different classes, because that's the whole purpose of namespaces to begin with, right? To disambiguate two classes that have the same name, so you put them in two different namespaces. So you have to make sure, if you want these two to be considered two parts of essentially the same class, you have to keep them inside of the same namespace. And so the next thing that we're going to do is we want to add an attribute to define a data type that will serve as metadata for our class. So in this case here, I'm just going to copy and paste in this attribute. All right, and we're going to need to add the system.componentModel.data annotations to make this work. Namespace, okay. Now you can see that I have, again, just to reiterate here, I created this attribute that defines a data type that will serve as the metadata for our class. The metadata class will be called product.metadata, but we don't have that yet. And what we'll need to do is we're going to flesh out a contained class. So we're going to put a class inside of a class in order to add the data annotation properties to that class. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We'll create another class called metadata, like that. All right, and here we'll go public system.GUID product ID, and we'll just do the get and the set. In fact, I think I can just do prop tab string name enter, prop, tab, decimal, tab price, and I think that's all we really need, right? Okay. And then what we do inside of this class is we add the attributes that we want to. So I'm going to add a couple of different attributes. For example, I'm going to say that this is the key for the product class. I'm going to go ahead and add that display attribute back in, and we'll set the name equal to product name. So let's also make sure to add a string length of 10, so the product can't be more than 10 characters long. And from validation perspective, we'll also say that it's a required field. Okay, and then finally on the price, we're also going to make it required. And then I'm also going to add some validation to it. Now this is going to add a regular expression to ensure that we are actually creating a dollar amount. All right. So we add this regular expression, and I'm going to be honest with you, I just went out on the internet and found a good regular expression for monetary types. All right. Now the result, and let me do one last thing here. I'm going to go and say that this is a sealed class, which means that nobody can inherit from this and extend it. I'm just going to stop it right there. Okay. And the result is that we've extended the code that's generated by the entity data model back here in our product.cs. However, we've not touched that generated code, and we don't have to worry about changes being blown away the next time that we update our entity data model. And so let's go ahead and just run the application and see how this is manifested, because we've made several different annotations that we haven't talked about yet. So let us go and edit the bar, and let's just type in some goofy value, right, and click save, and it says, whoops, it must match the regular expression. Okay, we might want to add a better error message there. That's kind of rough. We'll talk about that particular data annotation later. But let's try a negative number here. Can we do that? No. So let's go ahead and remove the product name and try to save it. Or let's put it back in and then try to remove the price field, but it's required. Okay, so you can see how all of these validation attributes affected the input for the edit screen. Now this is all well and good, and it makes a lot of sense, hopefully, to you, what we did and why we did it. However, let me back up for just a moment and say this. We wouldn't even need to go to such lengths as what we just did here if we had used that models folder a little bit differently in our applications architecture. So in other words, right now, the only thing that we have in the models folder is our entity data model. And it's really serving two purposes, or it's really addressing two concerns of our application. First of all, it's clearly the persistence model for our application. It handles all the CRUD operations for the product. But secondly, it also is the presentation model. I mean, those are the classes that we're using to pass between the controller and the view. Saying it another way, the built-in tools in Visual Studio made it really easy for us to be productive very quickly, but when we did that, we violated the separation of concerns principle. We allowed our model basically to serve two purposes instead of separating them to address their given concerns in the application's architecture. If we really wanted to separate concerns, if this MVC project were treating the contents of the models folder as purely a view model, since we're in the view layer of the application architecture, then we could simply add data annotations directly to the view model class, because it's not going to get blown away by the T4 templates. That's handled at an entirely different level in our application. So I tell you what, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here. That's a great topic that deserves a little bit more elaboration. So let's elaborate on this idea of what a model really is, or what the models folder should be used for in our applications architecture in the very next lesson. We'll see you there.